Here is something that happens all the time in real English conversations, and I want you to picture it clearly because I think you're going to recognize it immediately. Someone finishes explaining something with a few moving parts, a few details, maybe a bit of complexity. And then they pause, and they say something like, "Does that make sense?" Or, "You know what I mean?" Or, "So we're on the same page?" Or, "Does that sound right to you?" And the thing is, those phrases might sound like small talk, like filler, like a polite reflex that doesn't really mean anything. But they're not filler. They're not reflex. They are doing something very specific and very important in the conversation. They're checking. They're making sure the communication worked. They're asking, "Did you receive what I just sent you?" And if you don't know how to hear those phrases, if you don't recognize them as confirmation seeking, as an invitation to either confirm or clarify, you miss a whole layer of what's happening. You might nod when you should be asking a question. You might stay quiet when the other person is genuinely waiting to know if you understood. And that gap, that missed moment of checking and confirming, can lead to real confusion down the line. So today, that's what we're fixing. Today we are going to talk about how English speakers ask for confirmation, how they check understanding, how they invite you, quietly, naturally, often very briefly, to confirm that the communication has worked. And once you hear it clearly, this part of English is going to feel like the most helpful, most human, most connecting thing in the language. Welcome back. My name is Alex, and this is English in Fluency, the channel where we take the real, honest, sometimes messy complexity of spoken English and help you understand it from the inside. Not the textbook version, the real version, the one that happens in offices and on phone calls and over kitchen tables and in busy corridors. The version full of checking and confirming and making sure, because real communication between real people isn't always perfectly received on the first pass. And asking for confirmation, checking understanding, is one of the most fundamentally human things about English conversation. It's what keeps communication from going off the rails. It's what makes sure that when two people walk away from a conversation, they're both walking away with the same understanding of what was said. Today, we're going to follow a character named Mia. Mia is 26 years old. She's been living in a new city for about a year, working at a publishing company as a junior editor. Her English is good, strong actually. She reads a lot. She writes clearly. She holds her own in most conversations. But she has one specific gap that keeps causing her small but persistent problems. She misses confirmation-seeking language. When people ask her to confirm their understanding or invite her to confirm hers, she sometimes doesn't register what's happening. She treats the question as rhetorical, as filler, as something that doesn't require a real response. And then later, it turns out that things weren't as clear as everyone thought. Wires get crossed. Tasks get done wrong. Expectations get missed. And Mia, tracing things back, realizes the misunderstanding often happened at the confirmation moment. The moment she nodded and moved on when she should have paused and actually checked. Mia's closest colleague is a man named Felix. Felix is 31, patient, meticulous, and someone who checks understanding constantly, both his own and other people's. He's one of those rare communicators who genuinely make sure that what he said is what was heard. Watching him in action, Mia has started to notice how often he pauses to check, how naturally he does it, and how much smoother his interactions tend to be as a result. Things just go right with Felix in a way that Mia has been trying to reverse engineer. There's also a character named Diane. Diane is Mia's manager, 44, sharp, direct, and someone who runs a tight ship. Diane checks understanding in meetings in a way that's efficient and unhurried at the same time. She doesn't linger, but she doesn't move on until she knows everyone is clear. And Mia has noticed that in Diane's meetings, there's almost never a follow-up email 2 days later saying, "Wait, I thought we agreed to X." Because Diane doesn't let that gap open. And finally, there's a newer colleague named Remy. Remy has been at the company for about 3 months and is still learning the ropes. Remy asks for confirmation constantly, sometimes out of genuine uncertainty, sometimes out of a slight anxiety about getting things wrong. And while Remy's confirmation seeking is sometimes a little more frequent than necessary, it's also given Mia a close-up view of what the language of checking sounds like in its most explicit, unguarded form. Remy doesn't soften the confirmation questions much. They come out fresh and clear, and Mia has found that oddly educational. Okay, let's get into the story. It's a Monday morning, and Mia is in Diane's office for a quick briefing about a new project. Diane explains the project, its scope, its timeline, what Mia's role will be, what the deliverables look like. It's a fairly detailed briefing. Mia listens carefully, takes some mental notes, nods as Diane talks. When Diane finishes, she looks at Mia and says, "So, just to make sure we're aligned, your main responsibility here is the manuscript review and the author correspondence, right? The design side isn't yours." Mia says, "Right. Yes." And Diane says, "Good. Any questions?" Mia says no, and the meeting ends. Later that morning, Mia is starting to organize her work for the project, and she realizes she's not entirely clear on one thing: whether the author correspondence includes the initial contract queries or just the editorial ones. She goes back to Diane's email. It doesn't specify. She has to send a follow-up email to clarify. It's not a disaster. It's a small thing, but it cost time, and it created a small embarrassment. And it happened because at the confirmation moment in Diane's office, when Diane said, "Your main responsibility here is the manuscript review and the author correspondence, right?" Mia said yes, without actually making sure she understood author correspondence, in the same way Diane did. She tells Felix about this at lunch. Felix listens and then says, "Can I ask what Diane said right before you agreed?" Mia thinks. She said, "Just to make sure we're aligned. Your main responsibility is the manuscript review and the author correspondence, right?" Felix nods. That's a confirmation check. She was checking that you shared her understanding of your role, and she used a specific phrase to signal that. Just to make sure we're aligned. That phrase is almost always a setup for a confirmation question. It means, I'm about to check something, and I want you to actually confirm rather than just nod. Mia frowns. I did confirm. I said yes. Felix says, you confirmed that you'd heard her. But had you actually checked that your understanding of author correspondence matched hers? Mia is quiet. No. Felix says, that's the gap. A confirmation check isn't just asking, did you hear me? It's asking, do we understand this the same way? And answering yes means, yes, I understand it the same way you do, not just, yes, I heard you. And this is the first and most important thing about confirmation language in English. It's not just about hearing. It's about shared understanding. When someone checks for confirmation, they're not just making sure the sound waves reached your ears. They're making sure the meaning went from their mind to yours intact. And responding to a confirmation check with a genuine yes, a yes that actually means I understand this the same way you do, requires a real moment of checking your own understanding before you answer. Let's go through the main ways that English speakers ask for confirmation, because there are many different forms, each with its own flavor and its own context, and knowing them all gives you a complete map of this part of the language. The first and most common form is what I call the tag check. This is when a speaker makes a statement and adds a short question to the end of it. A tag that invites confirmation. You're handling the client side, aren't you? We said Tuesday, didn't we? The deadline is next Friday, right? This goes to Diane first, doesn't it? The tag, aren't you? Didn't we? Right, doesn't it? Is a built-in confirmation request. It says, I'm going to state what I believe is true, and I want you to confirm or correct it. The tag flips the statement into a question without changing its structure. And a careful listener hears the tag and knows this is a moment to actively confirm rather than just passively receive. Right is perhaps the most versatile and most commonly used tag in spoken English. It can go at the end of almost any statement to turn it into a confirmation check. The meeting's at 3, right? You've already spoken to Marcus, right? So the plan is to finish this by Thursday, right? And its close cousin. Yeah? Slightly more casual. Works the same way. We're good on this, yeah? You got that, yeah? These are invitations to confirm. And when you hear them, the appropriate response is not just or a nod. It's an actual confirmation. Yes, that's right. Or, actually, I thought it was 4 o'clock. Or, not quite. I haven't spoken to Marcus yet. The tag is an invitation to be honest about whether the shared understanding is actually shared. The second form is what I call the alignment check phrase. These are slightly longer, more explicit phrases that openly signal the speaker's intention to check for shared understanding. Just to make sure we're on the same page. Just to confirm. So we're aligned on this. Just checking we have the same picture. I want to make sure we're both thinking the same thing. Before we move on, are we agreed that let's just double-check this? These phrases are more deliberate than the tag. They're the speaker pausing the conversation intentionally to do a specific check. They say, I'm not going to assume we're aligned. I'm going to verify. And they deserve an equally deliberate response. When Diane said, just to make sure we're aligned, she was using this form. She was signaling, with that specific phrase, that what followed was not a casual remark, but an active confirmation check. And the appropriate response to an alignment check phrase is never just, yeah, or a nod. It's a real, considered, specific confirmation. Or, if something isn't clear, an honest acknowledgement of that lack of clarity. The third form is the echo and check. This is when a speaker repeats back, in their own words or in the other person's words, what they understand to have been agreed or understood, and then checks whether that echo is correct. So what I'm hearing is that the report is due Monday, not Wednesday. Is that right? So you're saying the budget hasn't been approved yet. Is that correct? Let me just check I've got this right. The client wants the presentation in 2 parts, not one, yes? The echo and check is a slightly more careful form of confirmation seeking. It makes the speaker's current understanding explicit and then puts it up for verification. It's saying, "Here is my understanding. Is it accurate?" Felix uses this form constantly, and Mia has started to notice how clean his communication is as a result. When someone tells Felix something with a few details, Felix often pauses before responding and says something like, "Just so I'm clear, you're saying that the review process involves 3 stages, not 2, and the third stage is the author's final approval?" And the person confirms or corrects, and then Felix responds from a position of actual clarity rather than assumed clarity. It takes a few extra seconds, but those seconds save enormous amounts of confusion later. The fourth form is the comprehension question. This is when a speaker directly asks whether what they said was understood. Does that make sense? Did that land? Was that clear? Do you follow? Are you with me? Does that track? These phrases are asking about the clarity of the explanation itself, not just confirming a specific fact. Does that make sense? Is the most common of these, and it's one of those phrases that can easily be treated as rhetorical, as if the answer is always, "Yes, of course," but it almost never is. When someone asks, "Does that make sense?" they are genuinely checking whether their explanation achieved its purpose. They want to know if you followed the logic, if you have questions, if anything was unclear. The right response to "Does that make sense?" is not always "yes." It's an honest answer. If it made sense, "Yes, that's clear," is appropriate. If it mostly made sense, but something was slightly unclear, "Mostly, I'm just not sure about the last part," is the right answer. And if it didn't make sense, "Actually, I'm not sure I followed. Could you walk me through the second part again?" is not a failure. It's a success. It's doing exactly what the phrase was designed to invite. The fifth form is the future-oriented check. This is when a speaker checks understanding in terms of what happens next, making sure the listener knows what they're supposed to do or what the next steps are. "So you'll send me the draft by Wednesday, yes? And then I'll take it from there, right? You're clear on what needs to happen before Friday? We both know what we're doing from here?" These checks are often at the end of a conversation or meeting, as a way of confirming not just shared understanding, but shared commitment. They're saying, "Before we close this, let me make sure we both have the same picture of what happens next." Diane uses future-oriented checks at the end of almost every meeting. She doesn't let a meeting end without confirming who is doing what and when. And Mia has started to notice that when a meeting ends with Diane's future-oriented checks, she always knows exactly what she needs to do. When a meeting ends without them, which happens sometimes with other people, she sometimes walks out slightly foggy on the specifics. Now let's come back to Mia and take her through a few more scenes, because I want to show you these confirmation forms in action across different contexts: professional and personal, formal and casual, simple and complex. It's Tuesday afternoon, and Mia is on the phone with an author, a writer named Thomas, who is working on a book the company is publishing. Thomas is warm and enthusiastic, but also a little scattered, and his explanations can wander. He's describing a change he wants to make to Chapter 7, a structural change that has implications for the rest of the manuscript. He explains it for a few minutes. Mia listens, follows as much as she can, takes notes. When Thomas finishes, Mia does something she has been consciously practicing. She pauses for just a second, and then she says, "Okay, let me just make sure I've got this right. You want to move the flashback sequence from the middle of Chapter 7 to the beginning. And that change means the timeline in Chapter 8 will also need adjusting to maintain continuity. Is that correct?" Thomas says, "Yes, exactly. That's it." Mia says, "Perfect. And the Chapter 8 adjustment. Is that something you'll do, or would you like me to flag it for your attention when I do the review?" Thomas says, "Oh, I'll handle it. I just need you to note it as a linked change so nothing gets missed in the review process." Mia says, "Got it. I'll flag them as linked changes in my review notes." And the conversation ends cleanly, completely. Both people know exactly what was agreed and what happens next. And it happened because Mia used the echo and check. "Let me just make sure I've got this right," before responding. She turned her partial understanding into a specific, verifiable statement and put it up for Thomas to confirm or correct. Thomas confirmed it. And now there's no ambiguity. Mia tells Felix about this later. She says, "I used the echo check with Thomas today, and it actually worked really well." Felix smiles. "How did it feel?" Mia says, "Slightly slower than I'm used to, like I was adding an extra step." Felix says, "That's the cost, a few extra seconds, and the benefit is, you know you got it right." Mia says, "Yeah." He confirmed exactly what I thought he'd said, but also added one thing, that he'd handle the Chapter 8 adjustment himself. If I hadn't checked, I might have tried to handle it and we'd have been doubling up. Felix says, "That's the thing about confirmation checks. They don't just confirm what you heard. They often surface things that didn't get said clearly the first time. The check creates a moment for the speaker to add what they missed." And Mia says, "It's like the check does two jobs at once." Felix says, "At least two. This is a really important insight, and I want to make sure we sit with it. Asking for confirmation doesn't just verify your understanding. It also gives the other person a chance to complete their communication. Very often, when someone explains something, they include most of what needs to be said, but not quite all of it. There are details they assume you'll infer, or things they forgot to mention, or implications they thought were obvious. When you check, when you echo back your understanding and invite correction, you give them the opportunity to fill in those gaps. The confirmation check is not just a passive receiving tool, it's an active communication tool. It generates clarity, not just verifies it. Let's talk about something that Mia has been grappling with for a while, which is the difference between asking for confirmation and seeming like you weren't paying attention. Because she has this worry, and a lot of English learners share it, that if she asks for confirmation, or echoes back what someone said, or says, "Just to check, did you say X or Y?" she will seem inattentive, like she wasn't listening properly, like she missed something, and so she often stays quiet when she should be checking, because staying quiet feels safer than revealing uncertainty. She raises this with Felix on Wednesday. She says, "I worry that when I ask people to confirm things, they think I wasn't listening." Felix shakes his head immediately. "That's almost exactly backwards," he says. "Asking for confirmation shows that you were listening. It shows that you took what they said seriously enough to make sure you got it right. The person who never asks for confirmation, who just nods and walks away, they might not have been listening at all. You can't tell. Mia says, "So the check is a signal of engagement?" Felix says, "The check is the opposite of not listening. It's active listening. It's saying, 'I heard you, and I'm making sure I heard you correctly.' That's a form of respect." Mia says, "I never thought of it that way." Felix says, "Most people feel more respected when someone checks. It means their words mattered enough to verify." And this reframe, confirmation as respect, as engagement, as active listening, is something I want you to really hold on to, because it changes the emotional experience of asking for confirmation completely. You're not revealing a gap. You're demonstrating care. You're saying, "This communication matters to me, and I'm not going to assume I got it right when I can actually check." Now let's look at something specific about the language of asking for confirmation from the listener's side. Because so far we've been talking mostly about the speaker asking for confirmation. But listeners also ask for confirmation. And the way listeners do this is slightly different from the way speakers do it. And it's worth understanding. When a listener wants to confirm their understanding, the most common approach is the echoed question. This is when you repeat back what you heard, framed as a question, to check that your interpretation is correct. "So you're saying the deadline has moved to next week?" "You mean we should send it to both of them, not just one?" "So the event is on the 15th, not the 14th? These questions take your current understanding, put it in your own words, and invite the other person to confirm or correct. They're direct without being aggressive. They're efficient. And they're enormously useful. The echoed question is different from simply repeating what someone said, because it puts your interpretation on the table rather than just their words. "You said the event is on the 15th, just parrots back what you heard. So, the event is on the 15th, not the 14th, shows your active interpretation. It shows that you heard 15th in context, and you're checking that you didn't mishear or misremember. The difference is subtle, but real. The echoed question shows you processing the information, not just receiving it. A closely related form is the clarifying question, which is when a listener asks for more information specifically to arrive at a clear understanding. When you say author correspondence, do you mean all author communications or just the editorial ones? When you said by end of week, did you mean Friday close of business? What do you mean by fully revised, a light edit, or a complete restructure? These questions are not echoes, they're probes. They're saying, what I heard was not specific enough for me to act on, and I need more detail. And asking a clarifying question is one of the most intelligent and most professional things you can do in English communication. It's not a sign of confusion. It's a sign of taking the communication seriously. Mia's journey with clarifying questions is part of what Wednesday and Thursday bring. She starts asking them more, and she starts noticing how other people, Felix especially, but also Diane in meetings, use them. And she starts to build a personal library of clarifying question structures that she can reach for when she needs them. There's the specificity question. Could you be a bit more specific about? There's the definition question. When you say X, do you mean? There's the scope question. Does that include? Or does that apply to? There's the timeline question. When exactly is that needed by? There's the priority question. How urgent is this compared to? And there's the ownership question. Is that something I should handle, or will you? All of these are forms of asking for confirmation, asking for enough information to genuinely understand what's been communicated. Let's bring Remy into the picture now, because Remy's confirmation-seeking style is so unguarded and so explicit that it gives Mia a clear, almost textbook view of the language. On Thursday, Remy comes to Mia with a question about a project. Remy has been asked to prepare a summary document and isn't quite sure what it should contain. After Mia explains it, Remy says, "Okay, so just to check, you want a one-page summary of the manuscript, covering the main themes, the intended audience, and the marketing angle. And you need it by tomorrow afternoon. Is that right?" Mia says yes. Remy says, "And it should go to Diane directly, or through you?" Mia says through her. Remy says, "Great. And one more thing, the format. Is there a template I should use, or is it flexible?" Mia says flexible. Just keep it clean. Remy says, "Perfect. I've got it." Mia watches Remy walk away and thinks, that was 3 confirmation checks in a row. Scope, channel, format, all of them clear, all of them specific, all of them answered cleanly. And now Remy knows exactly what to do. She mentions it to Felix later. She says, "Remy does the confirmation thing constantly. It used to feel like a lot, but I'm starting to see why." Felix says, "What do you mean?" Mia says, "It's almost never a waste of time. Every check closes a gap that could have caused a problem later. The summary question, the through you or direct to Diane question, the format question, all 3 of those could have gone wrong if Remy hadn't checked. And they would have cost more time to fix than the checks took." Felix says, "Exactly. Remy's checking feels slightly more than necessary sometimes, but here's the thing. Remy almost never has to redo work. While other people are backtracking, Remy is already done and doing the next thing." Mia is quiet. Then she says, "Because they spent 30 seconds checking instead of 3 hours doing it wrong." Felix says, "Exactly that." Let's now look at something slightly different. The emotional intelligence of knowing when to ask for confirmation and when not to. Because while we've been making a strong case for check and understanding, there is also such a thing as over-checking. And part of developing real fluency in this area is learning to calibrate, to know when a check is necessary and when you can trust your understanding and move forward. Over-checking, asking for confirmation of things that are simple, obvious, or already very clearly stated, can slow conversations down and, in some contexts, can make you seem less confident than you are. If someone says, "The meeting is at 3, and you say, "Just to confirm," you mean 3 in the afternoon, right? That check is probably unnecessary unless there's a genuine ambiguity about time zones or format. The question might come across as slightly anxious rather than careful. Good calibration means checking when there is genuine complexity or potential for misunderstanding, when there are multiple possible interpretations, when the stakes of getting it wrong are significant, when the information was delivered quickly or with a lot of other information around it, when you had a partial understanding but not a full one. In those cases, checking is not just appropriate, but essential. In simpler, lower-stakes situations, trusting your understanding and moving forward is often the right call. Mia talks about this with Felix on Friday, and he gives her a useful way to think about it. He says, "Before you decide whether to check, Ask yourself, if I act on my current understanding and it turns out to be wrong, what does that cost? If the cost is high, in time, in relationships, in outcomes, check. If the cost is low, if a small misunderstanding is easily correctable, you can probably trust your reading and move forward. Mia says, so it's about proportionality. Felix says, yes, check proportionally to the stakes. Don't check on the tiny things unless you're genuinely uncertain. Do check on the important things, even if you think you're probably right. Mia says, because probably right on something important isn't enough. Felix says, probably right on something important is a risk you don't need to take when a 10-second check can turn it into definitely right. This is such clean, useful thinking, and I want to make sure it's fully absorbed. Confirmation checking is a tool, and like all tools, it's most useful when it's used in the right situations with the right frequency. Use it too little, and you accumulate misunderstandings. Use it too much, and you slow conversations down and signal unnecessary anxiety. Use it proportionally, calibrated to the stakes and the complexity, and it becomes one of the most efficient and trust-building communication habits you can have. Let's come back to the full story now for a final scene, because I want to show you something that brings all of this together in a really satisfying way. It's Friday afternoon. Diane has called a brief end-of-week check-in. Just her, Mia, Felix, and Remy. She wants to confirm where everyone is on their projects going into the weekend, what the key deliverables are for next week, and whether there are any blockers she should know about. She goes around the table. Felix gives a clean, specific update. Remy gives an update, and then, characteristically, checks. And the manuscript review, Diane, does that include the author's revised introduction, or just the original chapters? Diane confirms. Remy nods. Great, I've got it. Then it's Mia's turn. She gives her update on the Thomas project and the linked changes she's flagged in her review notes. Diane nods. She says, good. So just to make sure we're on the same page, you and Thomas have confirmed the structural change to Chapter 7, and the Chapter 8 adjustment is his responsibility. You've logged it in the review notes, and the ball is in his court. Is that the right picture? And Mia says, clearly, confidently, without hesitation, that's exactly right. Because she knows it is. Because she checked with Thomas. Because she has a clear record of what was agreed. Because she didn't just nod and move on when there was something to verify. Diane says, perfect. She looks around the table. Any questions? Anything unclear about next week? Nobody says anything, and the meeting ends with everyone knowing exactly where they stand. In the corridor afterward, Felix falls into step beside Mia. He says, you answered Diane's confirmation check with full confidence today. Mia says, because I actually had full confidence. Felix says, because you did the checking earlier in the week. Mia says, yeah. I checked with Thomas, I logged the details, and then when Diane checked with me, I had everything I needed to say yes clearly. Felix says, that's how it works. When you check properly at the beginning, you can answer confidently later. Mia says, it's like checking early means confirming is easy later. Felix says, exactly. The early check is an investment. The confident answer later is the return. The early check is an investment. The confident answer later is the return. That is such a perfect way to put it, and I want it to stay with you. When you check understanding, When you take that extra moment to confirm, to echo, to clarify, you are investing in accuracy, in clarity, in the quality of your own work and your relationships with the people around you. And the return is exactly what Mia experienced in that Friday meeting. Clarity, confidence, no backtracking, no embarrassment, no gaps. Mia goes home at the end of the week feeling something she hasn't always felt in her English-speaking professional life. She feels like she was actually in control of the communication this week, not behind it, not catching up, not filling in gaps she should have filled earlier. Actually in control. And the shift, the change, is a simple one. She started checking. She started asking for confirmation when she needed it, and giving confirmation when she was asked for it, and understanding the difference between the two. And that simple shift changed the quality of everything. Now let's do our practice exercises, because you've been listening for a long time today, and it's time to give you tools you can use immediately. The first exercise is tag check spotting. For the next week, every time you hear a sentence ending in a tag. Right? Yeah? Isn't it? Aren't you? Didn't we? Doesn't it? Note it. Don't just let it wash past you as filler. Recognize it as a confirmation check. Ask yourself, what is the speaker checking? What would an honest, engaged response to this tag look like? This exercise builds your sensitivity to the most frequent form of confirmation seeking in everyday English. And it also helps you understand that a tag check deserves a real response, not just a nod. The second exercise is echo practice. Take any piece of information, from a conversation, from a podcast, from a briefing, and practice echoing it back in your own words as a confirmation check. So, what I'm hearing is, let me just make sure I've got this right. So, you're saying, just to confirm, you mean? The goal is to make this feel natural, not effortful. Practice it in low-stakes situations first, with friends, in informal contexts, so that when you need it in higher-stakes settings, it comes out smoothly. The third exercise is clarifying question building. Write down 5 situations where you commonly receive information that could be ambiguous. Project briefs, instructions from a manager, requests from colleagues or clients, plans made with friends. For each situation, write out 2 or 3 clarifying questions you could ask to make sure you genuinely understand. What specifically are you checking? The scope? The timeline? The format? The ownership? Doing this exercise in advance means you have the questions ready when you need them, rather than having to build them in the moment. The fourth exercise is the stakes assessment. For the next week, every time you receive information and feel uncertain about whether you fully understood it, do a quick mental stakes check before deciding whether to ask for confirmation or move forward. What is the cost if your current understanding is wrong? If the cost is high, check. If the cost is low, trust yourself and move forward. This exercise builds your calibration, your sense of when checking is worth it and when it's overkill. And that calibration is what takes you from a conscious, effortful practice to a natural, automatic skill. And the fifth exercise is what I call the generous confirmation. This one is about giving confirmation as well as seeking it. For the next week, when someone asks you, "Does that make sense?" or "Are we on the same page?" or "Right," instead of just reflexively saying yes, take a genuine half-second to check your actual understanding before you respond. If it really did make sense, say, "Yes, that's clear." If it mostly made sense, say, mostly, just checking about the last part. If it didn't quite make sense, say, actually, I want to make sure I got that right. Could you give confirmation that is actually true? Because the confirmation check is only as useful as the honesty of the response it receives. Let me bring everything together now, clearly and warmly, so you carry all of it with you after this. Today, we followed Mia through a week of learning to hear, use, and respond to confirmation-seeking language in English. We met Felix, the patient, meticulous communicator who checks constantly. We met Diane, who runs meetings with clean, efficient confirmation checks that prevent every possible downstream confusion. And we met Remy, whose unpolished, explicit checking gave Mia a clear view of the language at its most direct. We covered 5 main forms of confirmation seeking. The tag check, where a short question at the end of a statement invites confirmation. The alignment check phrase, where the speaker openly announces their intention to verify shared understanding. The echo and check, where the speaker states their interpretation and asks whether it's correct. The comprehension question, where the speaker checks whether their explanation was clear. And the future-oriented check, where the speaker confirms what happens next. We talked about how checking is a form of respect and active listening, not a sign of inattention. We talked about the echoed question and the clarifying question as listener tools for confirming understanding. We talked about calibration, knowing when to check and when to trust yourself and move forward. And we gave you 5 exercises: tag check spotting, echo practice, clarifying question building, the stakes assessment, and the generous confirmation. To take all of this into your real English life, confirmation is the moment when communication becomes real. It's the moment when what one person intended to say becomes what another person actually understood. Without it, communication is just words going in one direction and hope going in the other. With it, communication becomes connection. Genuine, verified, trustworthy connection. If today's lesson gave you something real, if it showed you a gap you didn't know you had, or gave you language for something you'd already felt but couldn't name, please share it. Share it with someone who keeps ending up confused after conversations they thought they understood. Share it with someone who nods when they should be checking. Share it with anyone who wants to feel more in control of their English communication. This channel, English in Fluency, exists for all of you, and we have so much more ahead. Please subscribe so you're here for every new lesson. Every episode on this channel is built with care, with real people, with real situations, and with a genuine desire to help you go all the way into the language, not just to the surface, but to the place where real understanding lives. This is Alex from English in Fluency. Thank you for being here today, for listening all the way through. That's the most important kind of confirmation there is. I'll see you in the next one. And until then, check early, answer honestly, and never let a right go to waste.